customary for us to begin every meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if we could please rise.
Those connections are sitting in water 24/7. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence for whatever resonates in your heart. Thank you.
So welcome and thank you for coming this evening. We have made available on the table over here a copy of materials for everyone who's interested. There is a recap of our December 18th meeting with an overview of the 5 options that were discussed. There's a packet and a PowerPoint with an overview of tonight's discussion. There's a list of items that we've looked at as part of an option 1, and then a timeline that maps out 2026 through 2070 with some estimated costs associated. So we share that with the group just as a point of interest. There's also a letter or an email that that shows our inquiry with an individual about triggers and what that might look like, so a copy of that email is also available. So we begin tonight's meeting by addressing the initial vote. In the November vote, introduced questions about affordability. We believe these questions deserve a response that allows for understanding of the alternatives. What that means is clarifying the financial reality. There is no zero-cost option. The Old Colony building requires major investment regardless of a vote outcome. A no vote does not eliminate costs to taxpayers. It does shift 100% of financial responsibility to taxpayers. The next slide identifies cost avoidance versus cost control. And the real question is not whether we spend money, it's whether we spend it with MSBA support or entirely on our own. The alternate options would fall completely on our taxpayers with little return on investment. An MSBA project requires shared costs and cost control. The biggest myth associated with our current situation, and one of the most common misconceptions, is that repairs are cheaper. And when we map out this timeline, it becomes evident that repairs will cost more over time and will deliver less value. Questions like, what about tying in water from the town of Middleborough has come up. Those have come up. And if we were to build a new building and tie in water from the town of Middleborough, that water would be utilized daily. It would allow for fire suppression. It would allow for sprinklers in a new building. The structure of this building, as discussed at prior meetings and backed by an engineer, does not support that level of fire suppression. And so what we would be looking at would be a hydrant loop. Now, if you put a hydrant loop in as a means of protection, what that would involve is attention to asphalt, right? Because we're going to have to lay down asphalt, tear up the ground. And if you were going to tear up the ground, you'd probably want to look at your understructure for programs like culinary and other areas of the building where there are certainly existing issues, which means jackhammering floors, building temporary structures to move those particular shops. And that becomes, if you've ever seen or read the book, if you give a mouse a cookie, they want a glass of milk. And if they have a glass of milk, they'll want to take a nap, so on and so forth. We open doors to unknowns, and we also uncover a litany of items that would require attention. As we work our way through these issues, what we're realizing is the solution of an option 5, or a new building, would probably not cost as much as these repairs. With these repairs, there's no MSBA reimbursement, there's repeated borrowing, and there's construction cost escalation. And that example of addressing the asphalt is only one example of many that we would uncover. Walking away from what the MSBA offers is financially risky, and that's where we look at what was talked about in terms of an option 4. Withdrawing or restarting the MSBA process presents the following risks. No guarantee of MSBA reentry, no reimbursement for the feasibility costs associated, construction cost escalation, the need to address immediate capital needs still exists, along with uncertainties. And so when we think about what escalation could look like, that's a very serious consideration. People have talked about, well, could we scale down a new project? But even with the scaling down of a project, we run into probably a higher cost for a new building. So it's a smaller building, higher cost, longer draw out in terms of time. What a revote means is not ignoring the previous outcome, but it is providing taxpayers with information relative to the financial impacts of a no vote. And admittedly, I do not believe that taxpayers were aware of the implications of a no vote, because there is no zero cost. This will certainly be an effort in ensuring fiscal responsibility. There's less disruption to the educational process, and there are clearer long-term solutions that we are able to put in place. After evaluating the 5 options and sharing them with this group and with our building committee, we heard back from 11 individuals following our last meeting from this group. I received 11 responses to the survey that was sent out. All of those responses fell under categories 1, 4, or 5, just to share that with this group. When we talked through all of the potential options with our building committee and evaluated the fiscal impacts, the building committee voted unanimously to look at a revote. And that revote was the recommendation that the building committee came up with. However, it is up to the school committee to make a decision relative to how to proceed. A revote minimizes long-term exposure and maximizes outside funding. It provides a predictable debt structure. It reduces local share due to grant funding. And it lowers the lifetime cost per taxpayer with a stronger return on investment. The long-term municipal impact. Any decision will affect capital planning, operating budgets, and enrollment pressures for decades, and we're aware of this. There is no zero-cost option. Doing less now costs more later. It is our belief that a revote is the most fiscally responsible solution. I want to share that post-vote as I was sitting in my office and thinking about the cost of repairs and the order that this might take place in. There was an overwhelming feeling of, how do we properly approach a situation like this and feel like we're doing the right thing by our taxpayers? Because to put a new engine in an old car didn't feel like the best decision. It's a really difficult decision. And my struggle comes with the idea of piecing this together over a 70-year period. When I watched meetings that took place in our member towns, I think there were people at the table who understood and talked about the different dilemmas that we all face. And having been in a frontline seat and hearing all of the ideas as we try and peel away each of those ideas, we've come to the conclusion that the most fiscally responsible and most fiscally sound decision would be to bring this forward with a group to solicit impact, to solicit input and discuss impact. There have been concerns expressed about operating budgets, and I want to reiterate that our operating budget has and always will be a collaborative process. Our bottom line is that every alternative to a revote costs more locally and delivers less value. The fiscally responsible path is the one that secures MSBA funding and fixes the problem once with a long-term solution. We're here because we need the support of our town officials to help our taxpayers better understand this approach. Because I think collectively, if we're able to discuss the processes, the options, and how we've come to these decisions, folks with a better understanding might be more likely to think about how our money is best spent. We put together a myth versus fact sheet. A myth is that voting no saves money. Voting no requires an alternative mechanism for a solution, but does not necessarily save money. Another myth was that repairs are cheaper than a new school. And as we've worked through the details here, it's become evident that repairs will not be cheaper than a new school. Other folks may have thought walking away would avoid debt. Walking away does not avoid debt. Walking away results in a very drawn-out process over a longer period of time that requires us to contemplate prioritization of certain pieces and probably a return to an MSBA process sooner than later. And again, some people use the expression kicking the can down the road, and it feels like just that. Another myth is that politics are driving the building project. I stand here before you in a bipartisan capacity. My job is to speak with all of our legislators and to speak with every person who I possibly can to work in the best interests of our member towns, our Old Colony students, and their education. Another myth is that a revote ignores our voters. And we want folks to know that we take very seriously the opinions of our voters, but do not feel like our voters were provided with as much information as we would have liked to have provided them. And so a revote allows us to provide as much information as we possibly can. You learn from your mistakes, and I certainly think that in terms of getting the word out, we have an obligation to make sure that the word gets out in a more effective manner. And a revote allows us to better educate folks as to the implications of a no vote. I wanted to take the opportunity to open up the floor, also to share the microphone with anyone here at the table who would like to speak. But if not, we wanted to open up the floor and give people an opportunity to either ask questions or make comments. And the floor is open to anyone in attendance. It is not limited to folks from our member towns.
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
You've got a big hill to climb to change the book, unfortunately.
Yes.
In my opinion. And it was a huge missed opportunity to get information out prior before everybody already cemented their decisions and cast their ballots. So what are you going to do this time differently to get the information out to avoid the low turnouts for people, the people that cherry pick the information that they wanted to hear, and especially the social media propagation of all the bad information that went out, and it's just got everybody riled up emotionally instead of logically. Because truthfully, I'm for a revote. My opinion was it was the most fiscal responsible thing to do, was to build a new school and take the government's money to do it with. But it wasn't a close vote. So you're gonna need to do something dramatically different to get the information out, and you're gonna need to do something that's gonna minimize the people that are, opportunity of the people to come out with what we saw on social media to turn everybody against a positive. So,
That's a great question, Peter. I think the first piece is that the collective is always stronger than a few individuals. And I think there was some uncertainty around folks being able to clearly address their take on this, including perhaps select boards and finance committees. We received clarity from the Office of Campaign in Political and Campaign Finance, OCPF. And select boards and FitComs are allowed, just like the auto ballot question, just like they would on a warrant, to express their support or their lack thereof. Now, I think that that's a very important piece of this process, is the collective. I think it's important to meet as a group in a room with everybody. I don't think that our 55 meetings, sometimes with 3 people, sometimes with 55 people, were an effective means of communication, because we didn't reach the masses that way. To answer your question, Peter, I think the messaging around the impacts of a no vote need to be wider spread and not in rooms with 3 and 5 people. Because if we had reached the masses with factual information, I think the masses might have been more likely to understand the implications of yes and no. And so I think that's a really important piece of moving forward. But I think the voice of the collective is as important, because when I read through this information, and when I plugged several iterations of this into AI and said, what is the best, most fiscally sound choice? It turned around and provided me with an answer that a revote is the most fiscally sound choice, interestingly enough. And so I think people who have done their homework and looked deeply at this have also shared a similar sentiment. I believe in my heart that it's the right decision and the most fiscally sound choice. Otherwise, I would never bring it to the table. Because I have an obligation to be A, transparent. I think for 10 years you've seen our budgets line by line. We operate in that capacity. B, to work in the best interests of our voters and make sure they get their biggest return on investment. And I believe a new building solves a lot of problems very quickly, as opposed to drawing this out over 70-something years. And again, I can't justify putting a new engine in an old car. And it's not for lack of taking care of something. It's that over time, when your understructure fails, you need to make sure you're thinking about what the proper solution is. And I think that this addresses those proper solutions. I also want to reiterate, there are not life safety issues as we currently sit. There are big issues that need to be addressed, but they are not life safety, because if they were life safety, we wouldn't risk the well-being of anybody in this building. So I just wanted to articulate that, because there may have been some misconceptions from a prior meeting, but there are not life safety issues.
you're gonna need to quantify the repairs the way that everybody quantified the amount of tax increase it was gonna boil down to per town.
Right.
I know when it pushed it, it worked out to roughly about $1,000 a year.
Mhm.
Everybody, my God, $1,000 a year. There's no quantification on the repairs that need to get done, especially the critical ones in the next 5 years that need to get done. And that needs to be put out so that they can have a better idea of what the difference is, as well as the individual ones moving forward. Okay, maybe it's 600 now, but over time, it's gonna be 1,800.
Right, yeah, that's a very good point, thank you. Do you want to speak to that at all?
I can, yeah. So the website, if you pull it up now, does have a repair calculator on there, but driving traffic to that website is the challenge. We are restricted by OCPF and what content we can actually push out unsolicited. But the information is there, and I guess that's where we're looking for help from this group to make sure everybody knows where to find that information. So we are fairly restricted by OCPF on pushing out unsolicited information.
Aaron, hi, David Wonar from the Acushnet Board of Selectmen. I'm not here speaking on behalf of the full board. I'm here speaking on behalf of myself. I've also had the pleasure of serving on the building committee. A couple data points that I think are important regarding a revote. As you mentioned, there was, the building committee voted unanimously to make that recommendation, and I voted in that affirmative. But there was a data point at that meeting. We went back and forth, discussion, should we revote or not? We talked about the emotional piece of it, like would it be disrespectful to the voters? And I think people were operating under the impression that a vote would need to take place 120 days from the previous vote, which would have put it like right around the March area, and that felt like really too raw, right? Like just felt that that would be a blunt object to come back so quickly and not give people time to get educated and or for the opposing side or the affirmative side. And you were able to clarify that that wasn't the case, right? Is that I think you referenced Stoughton, which was an example of a vote that took place months well after the initial vote. So if you could just clarify that for the people in the room, and then I want to expound on a couple other things, if that's okay.
So the timing of a revote does not require that we vote within that 120-day period. As a matter of fact, we've spoken with the MSBA, and they do allow, they would like to know what a plan might look like, but it would not be within a 120-day period. So a revote might happen, let's say in June or September. We talked about leaving the summer alone because people travel, and we want as many people as possible to be able to voice their opinions and their thoughts while providing them with proper information. And so, to David's point, a revote does not need to take place within that 120-day window, but a revote would likely take place either pre-summer in June or early fall.
There was, however, a 120-day limit imposed by the MSBA. That limit was to decide on how you were moving forward. So they had given us a date. We expect to hear from you on or by such and such a date, within that 120 days, what is it you intend to do? So that if our intention was to revote, that would be the response within that 120 days, and then it becomes the plan on when do we do that.
The two other perspectives that I just want to provide. When I was asked to serve on this building committee, my mission was twofold, which was one, based on my past experience in the town of Acushnet, where additions and renovations was the final outcome to help our elementary and middle schools. Also looking back at past history of library projects that went up for votes that didn't pass. And when I talked to Aaron, I said, we really have to explore additions and renovations. That's my ask as somebody from the town of Acushnet who just understands how the place operates. I've been doing public service in Acushnet since I was 22, and I'm going to get to that story next. I'm now 56, so it's been a while. And the committee, the building committee, did in fact examine additions and renovations and what it would look like to address the issues of this existing building. And they came to the conclusion that it was not a good use of taxpayer money. It would be a constant bleed every few years, constantly putting money into an arthritic facility. And so that's why the committee leaned into a new building. Now, some could argue, well, did they get too aggressive? Did they do this? Did they do that? With the price tag and looking at enrollment numbers. But really, it was a data-driven decision. And there were multiple stakeholder meetings of people in the community. And we asked the questions, what does enrollment trends look like? What are the applications? How many kids are being told no, that they can't experience vocational education. When this first kicked off, voc ed was not a trend. Now it's where everybody wants to be, right? We're looking at the economy. You hear the CEOs of NVIDIA and Palantir, AI CEOs saying, you know what, the kids need to go, the workforce needs to go into the trades. And it's not just about the kids, it's about an adult education workforce that needs to get retrained. So that's part of the mission as well. It's not just about the 766 potential children or teenagers, it's about adult ed. So that, again, something that when the committee, the building committee looked to address the need, that was a rationale. And when they decided to look at a revote, we talked about the politics of things and how can you repackage this and how can you re-message it. And one of the things that, again, that was brought to my attention, helped me form an opinion, was time, right? And for those of you who are political animals, 24 hours in politics is an eternity. But to have a few more months or half a year to allow the proponents to talk about the importance of the school, but also those who are opposed. If they're still opposed, they're still opposed. And I think having that period of time to go back to the taxpayer and the voter, I think makes sense, and I don't find that to be overly disrespectful. And I'll just share my own personal experience. 1992, I got elected to the school committee fresh out of college, 22 years old. And I was told at the time I was the youngest elected official in the town of Acushnet, in the history of the town of Acushnet. Thought I was feeling pretty good about things. It was a one-year term. The following year, I got elected, 1993. Of the slate, I was the highest voter turnout. Back then, you know, your ego's there, so you want to check where you stand up against all the elected officials. 9 months later, I got recalled as part of a whole school committee that got recalled because of a decision that was made by the school committee to not reinstate a principal. I was the only one voted in favor of that principal. I still got recalled. Fast forward a couple of years later, I repackaged myself, got my message out there. I get elected to the Board of Selectmen, 8 terms, 24 years. I'm now about to hang them up in April. Point is, yes, we can say, if I had said, you know what, the voters spoke, I'm never doing this again, I would have missed out on a great, great run of public service. And I'm sure there's probably people in here who've run, didn't get it the first time, didn't get it the second time, didn't get it the third time, but they stuck with it. And they gave the people a decision, you know, gave them the opportunity to make that decision. I would say, you know, put it back for a revote, give people the opportunity. If they say no again, then you've got your answer. But at least you'll have an opportunity to repackage it, message, and those who are opposed, they can, you know, anchor down and do the same thing as well. But at least you'll have given yourself a shot to take another run at this thing. That'd be my suggestion.
Thank you, David. And we're happy to sit down with people who have concerns or a lack of clarity. And if you do have concerns or a lack of clarity, please call my office. Don't let those things sit, because sitting together and talking through whatever those concerns may be is probably the most constructive way for us to be able to learn from what your concerns may be. For everybody, they have reasons for or reasons against, and none is necessarily right or wrong. It's that I want to make sure everyone is heard and that we also have a chance to address those concerns. And we're happy to sit down and have conversations. I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but I did ask Dr. Nash if she would join us this evening. And I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about the homework that you did, but I think that Dr. Nash has a history as a superintendent who was part of a building project in Hanover. She oversaw a process. She was extremely inquisitive when it came to this project. And when I tell you I don't know if there is anyone who's read more pages than Dr. Nash has, I mean that with sincerity, but I don't know if you're comfortable speaking or if you prefer not to, but I wanted to offer you that opportunity if you are.
Well, sure.
There's a podium there with a mic, Dr. Nash, if you'd like it, or we can hand you a mic, either way. Just if you hit the power switch.
There you go. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Nash. I am a retired superintendent of schools, as Mr. Polanski alluded to. I was fortunate enough to be superintendent of schools, or unfortunate enough to be superintendent of schools in Hanover when a building project for the new high school had been rejected twice. So I was entering in the third round, third vote. And like all good things, I think time sometimes creates the right atmosphere for a new building project. We were kind of in the queue, but we had to wait our turn for the fire station, the senior citizen building, and everything else to be done. And when it finally happened, coincidentally, our owner's project manager was PMA. Coincidentally, our architects were HMFH. So I can speak quite openly and honestly about the fact that you have probably two of the best outfits in the business. We came in under budget. I don't want to scare you and tell you how little our project cost. We were approved for $56 million. We built a school that was 164,000 square feet. For purposes of comparison, Middleborough High School opened its new building a few years back at 102+ million, and it is approximately the same size. So when we talk about the escalation costs, there's no question that that is going to happen if you do a repair or a project. So when I started looking at this as an interested taxpayer and a voter, I needed to learn about this school. I had never been in this building. I had no reason to be in this building. I didn't have any children who attended, although I had been a member of the old Rochester Regional School Committee and Rochester Memorial School Committee when I was a teacher prior to being a superintendent. And so I did a lot of research, as Erin alluded to, a lot of reading, visits, bothered Chad for some information. And my interest is really what is best for students. As a superintendent, you're not driven by making decisions about adults, you make decisions about what's best for students. And so I was really interested in looking at the programs here, the size of classrooms, the way that we could add new programs. CTE, Career Technical Education, is one of the hallmarks when we talk about what's happening in the state of Massachusetts. In fact, the superintendents in Massachusetts put out a position paper today that talked about CTE as being one of the hallmarks. You are exactly correct, the gentleman who talked about the fact that we need to prepare more students, not necessarily to enter liberal arts or four-year colleges, but we need to prepare them to enter pathways that involve careers. So I made the decision based on all of my research, attending meetings, harassing a lot of people sitting up there, that the only fiscally responsible thing to do is to vote for a new building. I'm certainly retired and I certainly am living on a fixed income like everybody else is. But I knew what the costs were going to be to renovate a building. But more importantly, I've seen what happens when you renovate a new building, and my colleagues have done that in other communities, and the impact that that has on student learning. You never recapture that, just as we never recaptured it when we lost that time when we had COVID and schools closed down, districts closed down. I was a superintendent then, so I understand what that was like. You don't recapture that time when you renovate a building. It's difficult enough when you're building a new building and you've got proximity to other schools, as we had in Hanover. So I made the decision, after looking at everything, that this was the fiscally most responsible thing to do. I think certainly getting a building that's 1.5 times the size of what you currently have brings more value to the 5 communities. I certainly think that it addresses the programming needs that you don't have. It certainly is gives the priority to enrollments. We know that more and more students are attending both tech schools. We see that across the state. It's probably the one area where we don't see student decline in enrollment. So I knew that this was it. And I would just encourage people, I think part of the misnomer and part of the problems that exist sometimes is misinformation that gets out there the first time you're out. As I said to you, it took us 3 times to get Hanover High School. The 3rd attempt was done because we had a very strong contingent of people who were very clear in the communication plan that was comprehensive, and it was customized for all of the challenges and the issues that we knew people and our parents and our community members didn't really get the first time or the second time. So I would just encourage everyone here to consider this as the most viable, fiscally responsible decision to make in the future. Thank you.
The podium is open for anybody who would like to speak. The podium is also open for anybody who has questions. So that's where we're at in this evening's presentation, and we're happy to address or hear from anybody.
Can you hear me? Perfect. David Arancio, a member of the Rochester Finance Committee. Again, not speaking for the Finance Committee, but a couple of questions I did have. So the group will be going for a revote. That is what the recommendation from the Building Committee is to the School Committee?
The recommendation from the School Building Committee to the School Committee was a unanimous recommendation for a revote, and that will be voted on at the school committee meeting on Wednesday evening.
Okay. So using the analogy of the car, I think it would, and again, my colleagues from the Finance Committee, the other 4 towns that can appreciate this, we're in the middle of budget season. And we're obviously working through that, diligently. So I think would be really helpful to understand is if this goes to a revote and it is a no, that what are I'd say the next 3 years, what are we going to need to do? And what is the impact that it's going to have on those 5-member towns in terms of you're going to have an additional budget request of $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is. And that is going to impact your assessment, which translates to your property tax base. We need to have you need to be able to say, well, do I buy a new car or do I repair my existing car? And I think that really needs to be put out there to show, okay, if the voters are okay with driving the old car, then this is what it's going to cost to maintain it. And that is a decision based off of the voters of the 5 towns to make. But I think that'd be super helpful to understand for us, not only as a resident, but as a finance committee, that we're trying to do a 5-year projection on what our anticipated costs are going to be. And schools are obviously a very important component of that. What would our 5-year projection look like, and how is that going to change? And how is that going to impact local services? I think that's something that needs to be communicated to us, not only as from a resident perspective, but as a person who is obviously trying to help town administrator and others balance their budget. Thank you.
So great question. We did hear that last time we met. So we have run that analysis, working closely with the school. I'll pull something up on the screen here. But you also have a few handouts. You have a handout that looks like this that has the high priority needs identified. And then you have another handout that looks like this one, that spreads those needs over time, attempting to stay under the code triggers that we talked about at length the last time that we met. So what that means in year one, it'd be a lot of site work, because the site work we don't expect to count towards those caps that trigger the code requirements. But it addresses as many of the high priority repair needs as possible while staying underneath that cap. What that looks like is up on the screen here, and I'll explain how that is set up. So there are 3 different colors here. You have the light blue bars, which are the cost of the new build with MSBA support, not including any tax rebates or credits that we expect to get. The black bars are the cost to repair the existing building, and then the red bars are this table that is handed out, spread out as if we were to pull a 30-year bond every 3 years to cover the scope associated with the items that add up to the value in that table. In all 3 scenarios, to baseline them, we ran them at 4% interest over 30-year bonds. When Aaron spoke earlier about predictability, you can see the debt service on the blue and the black bars is level each year, right? So it's level debt. So that is predictable. That's a predictability component that Aaron was speaking to. One of the questions that we have had a handful of times is, what would the debt service, annual debt service look like in that repair over time scenario? And you can see those red bars jumping up and down. That's why that is a very difficult question to answer, because there is no answer. It depends on where you are in the project. What we do know is if you take this and you map it out over time and you stay under those code triggers, by the end of it, you've spent approximately $539 million, including principal and interest. That compares to the new build scenario of $256 million, which is paid off in that 30-year period. So it really does just draw that out over time, as you see in the high priority list here, and then also the costs spreading out over the 3-year periods. Does that help?
Yeah, and maybe I didn't communicate myself. It's been a long day. I just think that as a person who's going to sit at the ballot and they're going to cast that vote, they need to understand what their vote means in terms of, how can I articulate this? They really need to understand that if your taxes are going to go up $1,000, let's say a Christian, they did that weighted average. If the no vote happens, their taxes are still going to go up $600 because you have to do these critical. I think there has to be some
Means of comparison?
transparency towards that, to understand that no matter what, right, you're going to do something and there's going to be an impact. And I think to weigh that over the 5 years, right, if you do your household budget in a 5-year projection, right, like my taxes go up every year, right, and it's just something that we deal with. I think when we're making this decision, we need to really, you need to talk from a point of, this is going to be your impact no matter what. You want to have a consistent understanding what your debt service is going to look like, or do you want to have this inconsistent end of the variable range that you could end up paying more in taxes by going this route of a no versus not. And that's not up to me or anybody else to make the decision. It's up to that person there. But again, they have to be informed with the best information they can to make their decision. I think it's up again to you guys to reevaluate what that looks like and how you want to package that message. Sorry, I was long minutes, but.
No, I mean, that was helpful for us. So the challenge with the messaging is we can run the numbers. The numbers are up here on the screen. The what ifs associated with the red line aren't in those numbers. So last time we met, December 18th, we heard from the structural engineer who said pretty point blank, hey, when you need a new roof, you're going to need to comply with new energy codes. And when you comply with new energy codes, you're not going to have as much snow melt, which means your roof loads are going to increase, and you're going to have to make structural upgrades to this building. We know this roof is 12, 13 years old. Roofs come with, typically, the standard warranty is 20 years. So, I mean, we might have 7 or 8 years from now where a new roof is needed, and we're not just looking at a roof, we're looking at whatever structural upgrades. But that's the big what if, and that's the risk component on that red line that is difficult to quantify. Is we don't know if that happens in year 7, does it happen in year 10, year 15? I mean, we can run a million different scenarios. We know it's gonna happen at some point, right? And that is the unquantifiable what if and the risk and the predictability component of this. The straight out repair, I mean, I like to call it the rip the Band-Aid off and let's just fix everything we know is wrong with this building. Right now, in today's dollars, put it out for a competitive bid, we can run those numbers. We know that's $134 million. We have detailed estimates, we have engineering reports. The new building, we know what the MSBA's contribution is going to be. We know what the IRA structure is. We know the district share is around $148 million. We've been asked if there's opportunities to save within that. We're certainly going to look at each of those. Quite honestly, the easiest savings in there is something like the geothermal system. That's been talked about a lot. There's a $7 million premium to go with geothermal, but if you delete geothermal, you cost yourself an $11 million tax rebate. So it actually costs the district $4 million more to go with the gas system than geothermal. And that's just a function of the current market. That wouldn't be the case if IRA 2022 modified by OBBBA this past July didn't go the way that it did. But we're watching all of those market indicators and we're trying to adapt and find ways that are going to keep the cost of the districts as low as we possibly can.
So let me repackage it this way. I don't know if it would be helpful, and again, I defer to my colleagues in the other FinCom select boards that are here, but I don't know if inserting your known fixed number of a new, right, and your unknown, but you're gonna take a wild educated guess and give you, we're gonna put a number there, right, that we think is close, and do a 5-year run. Based off the budgets that go up, right? Our budgets go up at a minimum of 2.5%, 3%, right? Annually, or sometimes more, depending on your contracts. Plug those numbers in to each town's budget and see what it comes out at. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of hypotheticals, even as year to year from a finance committee perspective, right? Sometimes it's good, sometimes we're all right, growth is great, sometimes it's no way we can do this and we got to figure this out, right? So I think to give us some, maybe that's another angle, is to say to the finance committees, to the select boards, to the town administrators, here are some 5-year projection numbers you can insert, do a cost run. At least give us some data to look at. Cam would probably agree that I love data, so the more information you give people like me, the better off I'm going to be.
David, I'm a little confused though, because are you anticipating or suggesting that anything we do on a yearly basis would not require a debt exclusion? Because I can't imagine coming to Rochester, we're hearing what the state you're now in, and we've got to try to fit in our operating budget into that, to add capital items that would be included in our operating budget seems almost impossible. And now you're going down a road that makes me very nervous as a school committee member, because if we are going to be held to debt exclusions, how many of them are we gonna get done? Because these towns, I'm guessing, I know the town I've lived in for over 40 years, you might get it once. Maybe if you're really good, you might get it a second time. But when we're talking about doing a building for 50 years, we're talking about many, many debt exclusions. And I just can't envision that anybody will have an appetite for that. So as a school committee member, that goes back to, this is why the fiscally responsible thing to do is get what needs to be done in this building done.
But I think you just kind of made that point, right? Is to say that, you know, what is the appetite for that, right? I think you kind of hit the nail on with that.
That's why I thought I was mishearing what you're saying, because to fit it into the town's operating budget.
Well, either way, right? If the vote is no, the school committee is going
Okay.
to come to the 5 towns and say, this is what we need to do, right? And we got to figure this out, which is what I think we collectively all said. We understand that we're gonna have to figure out something, whatever the path looks like.
Okay,
But we have to have a better understanding, or a better understanding, but we have to have some type of guidance to,
as long as we understand that the path may not be within the budget, may be a debt
so
exclusion.
let's run that through, right?
Yep,
To
got
get,
it.
to hopefully bring solutions to the table versus more questions.
Thanks, David.
Some of the other uncertainties, David, that we face are certainly with regards to procurement, right? Because when you're putting out smaller projects, piecemealing them, the response you get is going to be much different than when you're putting out a building project. The costs associated with that and the impact on escalation are significant. So again, from a fiscally responsible perspective, to be piecemealing something for 70 years and relying exclusively on debt exclusions every 3 years or whatever mechanism it is for paying off these projects is not really as fiscally sound as the option 5. And that's, and what you're saying was certainly part of the discussion, because I think to your point, if there were a no vote, at that point we have to think about what does that look like. The specifics of procurement would certainly preclude us from having something definitive at this point. We could have a ballpark or an estimate, but we're not going to have specifics, nor do we know how we're going to be treated when we put something out piecemeal, right? Because the bidders are going to say, well, first of all, I have no interest. I have no idea what I'm going to uncover. And there are all sorts of factors that come into this as we sort out the details. But to your point, these are pieces of the puzzle that we'll have to contemplate. Cam?
I had sent an email of something about what we're talking about now, and I don't think I did a good job at articulating, well, my question. The town administrators and other stakeholders met sometime during the spring and had an initial presentation from the consultants about the costs of the repair versus a new school and how expensive a total repair would be. And it was made very clear during that presentation that Mass CMR states that if the cost of a new building exceeds 30% of the property value, of the building value excluding property, the building is appraised at roughly $16 million. So that's $5.1 million over 3 years. It would trigger that full code. And so I was surprised, but I think it highlights perhaps why we are here today with that no vote, because our last meeting that we had in this building in December, we were talking about how towns would be happy to spend or to advocate for spending $30 or $40 million for critical repairs. And I don't think it was fully answered or explained beyond CMR 780 says you can't go beyond that threshold without kicking in a full repair. As to why that option is not possible. My building commissioner, the town of Rochester, can say building code says that there is no wiggle room there. Our consultants can say the state building code is very clear. There is no wiggle room there. And yet, 6 months after that initial first kickoff meeting, we're still talking about why can we not do a $30 or $40 million repair? I think it's clear in law why we can't do it, but I am advocating for, until we have some sort of state entity that very clearly says, if you spend $6 million in 3 years, we're going to do A, B, or C. I don't know that a yes vote is possible. And so that is my suggestion or my comment. However that happens, whether it's an act, a request of our legislatures to get involved, whether it's DESI saying, no, we're not going to come in and spend $8 million in 2 years and force you to go to full code. Like, until we have those answers, however that is possible, I don't know that a yes is possible. a yes is possible. I don't know that a yes is possible until we have an entity beyond the consultants interpreting CMR 70. I,
Yep, so
how that's articulated though and brought out is my point.
in the packet here is a response from Don, who is, I'm not going to attempt her last name, the chair of the MAAB, the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board. That's the state agency that oversees 521 CMR. So the first step in any variance is the local authority having jurisdiction, so the Rochester building inspector, the Rochester fire chief would need to say yes and essentially endorse it, and then it gets submitted to the board. In her response here that everyone has a copy of, you'll see that she notes it's unprecedented for the MAB to grant a waiver of that size and magnitude. When we had first presented the question, I think she thought that I was joking, but the initial was you need to go to the local building inspector first, and then you can bring it to MAB, but you're probably not going to get anywhere with MAB. The other two state authorities would be the BBRS. So trying to get an unofficial opinion from the BBRS is probably not likely, but the local building inspector, that is their overseeing agency, right? So I mean, the local building inspector would be the first opinion, and if they were willing to entertain the idea of looking past these CMR required thresholds, then we would take it to the next step, which would be the BBRS. Similar on the fire end, that would be through the state fire marshal's office, so it would start with the local fire department, and then if it gets cleared by the local fire department, it would move up to the state. But I think in all three of those, we would really be in unprecedented territory. I mean, this is something that I don't think has happened
So
anywhere
I'm not
else.
advocating for this by any means. I think it is just important to show the voters, these are truthfully your only options, because we have turned over every rock and looked in every corner for a solution, and we have been given no other option. Zero is not an option, and I agree, most certainly. I just think it's important to say neither are any of these things, because literally 6 months after we had the formal kickoff, we're still having conversations about spending 30 or 40 million when the law really isn't going to let you. And so, in just in terms of getting that yes campaign out, until you have that email, publicized or however, I think it's going to be enough to.
Absolutely agree. I mean, we had dedicated materials in the outreach presentations, but you can only reach that limited audience. Social media, we pushed out content specific to this, trying to dispel the notion that there was a way that 521 CMR, 148 CMR, 780 CMR could be just set aside. It's just not rooted in reality, and trying to get that message out has been challenging, but we are trying.
In fact, I'm talking to my town council, who's trying to learn more about this. She said it would even be theoretically possible that if a community went forward and spent in excess of that 30%, you could even have like forced costs, where you're like mandated to, move to full code potentially if you chose to disregard CMR, and you could have that.
I believe the penalty for 521 CMR violation, which is the first trigger, is $1,000 a day. So I would agree with council on that, based on my experience.
I can just offer up one more suggestion. If the school committee decides to go forward with a revote, I think it's really important that this body, this group, this isn't the last time that you meet, right? So in the last go around, the school building committee was the driver of the process to then bring it to the voters. And you did a good job of getting out there, right? You went out and you did all these meetings. But I would encourage you to go beyond that building committee. And if this group is an ad hoc stakeholder group, keep it once a month to provide critical updates. So when questions come up that Cam just raised, you've got a rapid response. And not a minute goes by without a response, because those questions that are raised are done so, I think, in a manner that are intended for constructive, right, a constructive result. And not everybody's is in the inside baseball. They don't know the CMR. But they're just asking questions either as if a voter was asking them, or they truly have those questions. So I think, well, that, and I sat on that committee. Surely we met for what, 2-3 years?
Seemed like it.
It was
2
a long
years.
haul, but I think if you're gonna have any shot whatsoever, you gotta have above and beyond that body that has been meeting once a month. And this is a good first start.
Thank you, David. Anyone else? Well, we appreciate everyone joining us this evening. I think what we would like to do is set up an opportunity for this group to meet with regularity, and we will be in touch with details pertaining to that, so that this can be an ongoing opportunity for correspondence. And thank you to everyone who made time to be here this evening. We sincerely appreciate it.